Hello, my name's Keith Templeton. I live in Padbury at the moment, but I lived in Winslow before that. I'm not a gardener. In fact, I was expecting to be a passenger here today. I was expecting to sit and listen to you and not have to talk, but I shall pass on a few of my observations of keeping an allotment over a number of years. The first time I kept an allotment was in the mid-70s, along with David here in Winslow, on a piece of ground which is known as Paul's Piece. It says, or it supposedly says in the deeds, that as long as you've a chimney smoking over Winslow, you can have 8 poles on Paul's Piece. I've not seen that. I don't know whether it's true or not. But what I'm going to talk about are the things that I have noticed over the years, things that have been important to me. For a start off, the most important thing is don't take a piece of ground bigger than you can manage. The first allotment I had in the 70s was, I think, bigger than the 8 pole prescribed, and I had a fairly time-consuming job at the time, and as a result of that, it was always a battle. I was always going up there with my tools. The kids were fed up, and they wouldn't stay there, and it became a toil. And I didn't enjoy it on that occasion. I kept it for several years. I struggled. The only thing that I had any success with was onions, and I'm going to talk about onions in a minute. But then later, when I retired 6-7 years ago, I took on allotment, 8 poles, and with the time, I have thoroughly enjoyed growing my own vegetables since. I think the most important thing is don't take advice. Do what you think is right for you. I'll give you a little example. I was always told, my granddad always said, you plant your potatoes on Good Friday. Now that, of course, was because that was traditionally a holiday for agricultural workers. And so therefore, that was a day off when they could get out there and do the job. But the problem is, Good Friday varies over, what, a 6-week period? So traditionally, you are now told you should plant your potatoes on St. Patrick's Day. And that's quite good. I got engaged on St. Patrick's Day, and my father was Irish, so I always remember St. Patrick's Day, and that's when I tried to do it. But this year, I had a problem. I was going away during March, and I wasn't going to be around. So I just put it off, and everybody said, oh, you should be getting your potatoes. This is Padbury philosophy as opposed to Winslow philosophy. You've got to get them in you. And I said, well, sorry, I'm going away, you can't do that. So off I went, and the holiday I took was actually a trek to Everest Base Camp. So I was going up the Khumbu Valley amongst all the Sherpas, and on St. Patrick's Day, we were coming down from a place called Gorak Shep, to a place called Tangbushi. And as we walked into Tangbushi, the Sherpas were planting their potatoes. And it was St. Patrick's Day. Anyway, when I got home, obviously, I got to work and I planted my potatoes some weeks later, and I had one of the best crops I've ever had. So, it's advice that's given, but you have to do what's comfortable for you. I don't run my allotment and then take the holidays at times when I know that I'm not needed on the allotment. I live my life and I fit the allotment in between. The next bit of advice is get a shed. You can't not have a shed. David will tell you, we weren't allowed them. In our day in Winslow, we weren't allowed a shed. I had some pretty nasty accidents falling off my bike with a spade over my shoulder or a rake under my arm. And now I'm in Padbury, we're allowed sheds. The first thing I did was put up a shed. And everything's in there. I've even got a spare pair of spectacles there so I can read the seed package. You get there and you can't read anything when you get to my age anyway. You can't read it. I've even got a spare pair of specs there so I can read everything. And everything is in there. I have compost, all my tools, seeds, rat poison, and all those nasty things that you organic people don't like spraying on things. The next thing I'll go on to is just that. I grow up and I grow. if something starts eating what I'm growing, I zap it. I'm not going up there to make sure that I'm having making sure the environment's safe and what. I want to have vegetables. As long as I wash them afterwards, make sure everything's washed off, I zap them. I don't go into organic. I won't go into that because that would be a bit of a hobby horse. Onions. Onions are another thing. I was told originally, you find yourself a good onion patch and you stick with it. You stick with it. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. I've moved my onions about. This year, I've moved them 3 times on this allotment. I moved them the 3rd time this last year, and I got first prize in the Padbury Produce Show for my onions. So I think I've got proof that you don't have to stick to the same place. But you hear other people will tell you, I was listening to Gardener's World on the radio a little while ago, and they said you should move them every 9 years. I move them every year. I know other people who say, stick to the same spot all the time. Do what you think is right. Do what you feel is right. Enjoy it and experiment, and don't mess around with it. And the one last thing I want to say is I've started 3 allotments, and on most cases they've been in pretty poor state. The last one, which I've just done, I was determined not to put a rotavator on because it was ground that had been left for rather a long time, and I was determined not to cut all the roots up and chop them and spread them around the allotment and forever be weeding. So I decided I'd dig it by hand. And because I did that, for the first few years, I never got a fine tilth. So I never produced carrots, root vegetables that were nice and straight and clean because the soil was always lumpy. So don't be afraid to get a rotavator on and chop it all the way down. Get it fine, get a fine tilth. It's all very well thinking, oh, no, it's not, all those weeds. That's all I'm going to say. As I say, it was a bit of a surprise that I was going to talk, so I'm just sort of passing on. I suppose the main theme is do what you enjoy it and do what you want to do. Don't worry about what the advice that you get from everywhere, apart from Mr. Ward, who will tell you when to plant your seeds, I'm sure. I do read the seed packets, and I do try and get them in at roughly the right time. Just one last thing, just to make you smile. You heard about the old boy who, just like me, grew plenty of vegetables on his allotment, and his wife said to him on Sunday morning, pop up and cut me a cabbage for lunch, will you? And the old boy went up the garden, and unfortunately as he was going up the garden he had a heart attack. Dead. And the neighbour was saying to the old lady a few days later, well, that was terrible. That was terrible. You just sent him up to get a cabbage. Whatever did you do? Well, she said, I had to open a tin of peas. Thank you.